The summer heat pressed down on Fort Marshall like a weighted blanket. Through the large windows of the mess hall, sunlight streamed in, casting golden rectangles across the polished floor. At 1300 hours on a Tuesday, the cacophony of metal trays, conversations, and occasional laughter filled the air. Emma Collins moved with practiced efficiency behind the serving counter. At 38, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her makeup minimal but present, just enough to highlight her natural beauty without drawing attention. Extra gravy today. Sergeant Wilson? Emma asked, a warm smile crinkling the corners of her eyes as she served one of the regulars. You know me too well, Mrs. Collins, the burly sergeant replied with appreciation. Emma had that effect on people. In just 8 months as the head cook at Fort Marshall's main mess hall, she'd memorized not only names but preferences, allergies, and the small details that made soldiers feel seen. In a place where uniformity was the rule, Emma's personal touches were a reminder of home. Fort Marshall wasn't just any military installation. Established in 1942, it had served as a crucial training ground for amphibious forces during World War II. Its weathered buildings and parade grounds had witnessed generations of America's finest preparing to defend their nation. Now it housed specialized counterterrorism units and served as a symbol of American military tradition. The old-timers called it the Forge of Giants, a nickname earned through decades of producing military heroes. As Emma handed out today's special, her famous pot roast that somehow tasted better than standard military fare, a loud crash silenced the usual mess hall chatter. All heads turned toward the entrance. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Blackwood stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 soldiers. At 45, Blackwood cut an imposing figure, 6 feet tall with a muscular build maintained despite his advancing years. His face, weathered from deployments in harsh environments, wore an expression of perpetual disdain. The ribbons on his chest told the story of a decorated officer with multiple tours in the Middle East. But it was his eyes that revealed the most. Cold, calculating, and right now slightly glazed from alcohol consumed, despite regulations against drinking on duty. Well, if it isn't the finest dining establishment this side of the Potomac, Blackwood announced, his voice carrying an edge that made several junior officers suddenly find reasons to finish their meals quickly. Emma continued serving, maintaining her composure even as she registered the tension spreading through the room. She'd dealt with Blackwood before. The lieutenant colonel and his squad had transferred to Fort Marshall 3 months ago, and they'd made their presence known immediately, and not in a good way. What's on the menu today, sweetheart? Blackwood approached the counter, deliberately knocking into a young private who scrambled to move out of the way. Pot roast with vegetables, sir. Would you like some? Emma replied evenly, deliberately omitting the term of endearment he'd inappropriately used. Blackwood leaned over the counter, invading her personal space. The smell of whiskey was unmistakable. Depends. Did you make it with those pretty little hands of yours? Behind him, his squad snickered. Major Mike Dyer, Blackwood's right-hand man, made a point of staring at Emma's figure. At 35, Dyer had a reputation as a marksman with anger management issues. Next to him stood Captain Ryan Cooper, 28, the demolitions expert whose intelligence was matched only by his cruelty. Captains Jake Peterson and Travis Walker completed the group, the former a close-quarters combat specialist, the latter a communications expert with a background in military hacking. The entire kitchen staff contributed to today's meal, sir, Emma answered professionally. Would you prefer the end cut or center? Blackwood's face darkened at her deflection. I asked you a simple question, Mrs. Collins. Don't they teach cooks to respect officers anymore? The mess hall had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the clatter of utensils had ceased. Everyone was watching now, including several senior officers who suddenly seemed fascinated by the contents of their plates. I respect the uniform and what it represents, Colonel, Emma said calmly. Now, about your lunch. Forget lunch, Blackwood snapped, slamming his hand on the counter. I'm more interested in why a simple cook thinks she can talk to me like that. One of the younger kitchen staff, Emily, a 22-year-old recent hire, approached hesitantly. Mrs. Collins, should I take over while you— Stay back, Emily, Emma said softly, her eyes never leaving Blackwood's. There was something in her posture now, a subtle shift that wouldn't be noticeable to most, but spoke volumes to anyone trained to observe. Her weight had shifted slightly to the balls of her feet. Her breathing remained measured and controlled. Colonel James Henderson, the base security commander, had been enjoying his meal in the corner of the mess hall. At 60, the Vietnam-era veteran had seen enough confrontations to recognize the warning signs. He started to rise from his seat, but found himself curiously hesitant to intervene. Something about Emma's demeanor suggested she wasn't as vulnerable as she appeared. You know what I heard? Boys, Blackwood addressed his squad loudly enough for everyone to hear. I heard Mrs. Collins here is married to some contractor who couldn't cut it in the real military. That right, sweetheart? Your husband couldn't handle the pressure, so he ran off to play soldier with the private sector? Emma's expression didn't change, but something flashed in her eyes. A momentary glimpse of something cold and dangerous that vanished so quickly, one might question if it had been there at all. My husband served his country honorably, Colonel. Now, if you're not interested in lunch, perhaps you could make room for those who are. Blackwood's face flushed red. No one dismissed Richard Blackwood, especially not a mess hall cook. Honorably, let me tell you what I think about— Sir, a brave staff sergeant interrupted from behind. There's a line forming. Maybe we could continue this another time. Blackwood whirled around. Did I ask for your opinion, Sergeant? The staff sergeant took an involuntary step back. That's what I thought, Blackwood sneered, turning back to Emma. You've got quite the fan club here, Mrs. Collins. Makes me wonder what exactly you're serving these men besides food. Several officers at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Blackwood had powerful connections. Colonel Raymond Carter, Blackwood's commanding officer, had friends in Washington, the kind who could make or break military careers with a phone call. Captain, you are holding up the line. Please make your selection or step aside. Emma remained impassive. Or what? Blackwood challenged, leaning even closer. What exactly will you do, Mrs. Collins? Before Emma could respond, Captain Cooper deliberately knocked over a tray of glasses at the end of the counter. The crash of shattering glass punctuated the tense standoff. Oops, Cooper said with mock innocence. Looks like you've got a mess to clean up. Emma glanced at the broken glass, then back at Blackwood. Emily, please get the broom from the supply closet. No, Blackwood countermanded. You do it, Mrs. Collins. Get down on your hands and knees where a woman belongs and clean up that mess. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the mess hall. Emma stood motionless for several seconds, her eyes locked with Blackwood's in silent defiance. Then, without warning, a glass tumbled from a tray being carried by another kitchen worker. Without looking, Emma's hand shot out and caught it midair, her reflexes impossibly quick for a simple cook. She set the glass down gently, seemingly unaware of the surprised looks from those who had witnessed the feat. I believe my staff and I have work to do, Colonel, Emma said, her voice firm. Your lunch will be ready when you decide what you want. Blackwood's eyes narrowed dangerously. No one said no to him. Not here, not in his domain. You need to learn some respect, he growled, his hand moving toward her. Emily returned with the broom, her young face registering alarm at the escalating situation. Mrs. Collins, I've got the— Blackwood snatched the broom from Emily's hands and thrust it towards Emma. Take it, now. Emma didn't move. I said take it, Blackwood shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. And I said we have work to do, Emma replied, her voice steady despite the clear threat before her. For a moment, the mess hall seemed frozen in time, a tableau of tension with Emma and Blackwood at its center. Then, with a speed that shocked onlookers, Blackwood's hand lashed out. The sharp crack of his palm against Emma's cheek echoed through the silent mess hall. The force of the blow knocked her sideways, causing her to stumble against the counter before regaining her balance. Emily gasped. Several soldiers half rose from their seats. Colonel Henderson was now fully standing, his face a mask of outrage. But no one moved. Not yet. Emma straightened slowly, one hand touching her cheek where an angry red mark was forming. A small trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth, where her lip had split against her teeth. But it wasn't her injury that commanded attention. It was her eyes. Gone was the warm, friendly cook who remembered everyone's name and favorite dish. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone with eyes cold as Arctic ice and just as unforgiving. "That's better," Blackwood smirked, turning to his men. "See, boys? Sometimes women just need a firm hand to remember their place." Major Dyer laughed nervously, his eyes darting between his commander and Emma. Something about her stillness unnerved him. "Maybe next time she'll—" Blackwood began, turning back towards Emma with his hand raised again. The mess hall doors swung open. Later, witnesses would struggle to describe exactly what happened next. Some would say the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Others would insist they felt a pressure change, like the air before a thunderstorm. All would agree on one thing: the atmosphere transformed the moment Daniel Collins walked in. He stood 6'3", his frame filling the doorway with the solid presence of a man comfortable in his own skin. At 48, Daniel Collins looked exactly like what he claimed to be, a former military man turned private security consultant. His short-cropped hair showed touches of distinguished gray at the temples. He wore simple civilian clothes, a blue button-down shirt, khaki pants, and sensible shoes. Nothing about him immediately screamed dangerous. And yet, the room felt completely silent. Daniel's eyes scanned the mess hall with methodical precision, taking in every detail in seconds. The frozen tableau of diners, the tense postures of Blackwood's squad, the red mark on Emma's cheek, the small trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. His expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes, a coldness that seemed to lower the temperature around him. He moved with unhurried confidence, each step deliberate as he crossed the mess hall floor. No one spoke, no one interfered. They simply watched as Daniel approached the serving counter. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the silence. It wasn't a question. "Daniel," she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips despite her injury. "You're home early." "Flight got in sooner than expected," he answered, his eyes never leaving her face as he assessed her injury. Then, with gentle precision, he reached into his pocket for a handkerchief and carefully dabbed at the blood on her lip. Only after tending to Emma did Daniel turn his attention to Blackwood. He didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at the officer, his gaze moving from the man's face to his raised hand and back again. "Problem here?" Daniel asked, his tone conversational despite the undercurrent of tension that had every combat veteran in the room on high alert. Blackwood recovered quickly from his surprise, a sneer forming on his face. "This is military business, civilian. Why don't you move along before you get hurt?" Daniel didn't move. "Seems to me you've already hurt someone." His eyes flicked briefly to Emma. "My wife." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face before he masked it with bravado. "Your wife needs to learn some respect for the uniform. Maybe you both do." Several members of Blackwood's squad shifted their positions, subtly moving to flank Daniel. If he noticed, he gave no indication. "Respect," Daniel repeated, as though considering the word. "Daniel," Emma said softly, a warning in her voice. He acknowledged her with the slightest nod, never taking his eyes off Blackwood. "I think you owe my wife an apology, Colonel." Blackwood barked a laugh. "An apology? Who the hell do you think you are?" "Just a man who doesn't like seeing his wife assaulted," Daniel replied evenly. "This is a military installation, civilian. Blackwood growled. You have no authority here. I'm not asking for authority, Daniel said. Just an apology. Blackwood's face darkened. Boys, I think our civilian friend needs an escort out. Captain Peterson stepped forward, a predatory grin spreading across his face. With pleasure, sir. What happened next occurred so quickly that many witnesses would later disagree on the sequence of events. Peterson reached for Daniel's arm. Daniel pivoted slightly. There was a controlled movement, barely perceptible to untrained eyes. Then Peterson was on his knees, his wrists locked in a joint manipulation that had the hardened special operator wincing in pain. Daniel hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't broken a sweat. He simply stood there, holding Peterson immobilized with what appeared to be minimal effort, his expression still as calm as when he'd entered. Don't, Daniel advised quietly as Dyer reached for his sidearm. You really don't want to escalate this. The mess hall had become so quiet that the sound of the air conditioning cycling on seemed deafening. Everyone watched, transfixed, as this seemingly ordinary civilian held one of Blackwood's elite squad members, immobilized with a technique straight out of advanced close-quarters combat training. Stand down, a new voice commanded from across the room. All eyes turned to Colonel Henderson, who was now approaching with purpose. The older officer surveyed the scene with experienced eyes before focusing on Daniel. Release the captain, please, Henderson requested, his tone respectful despite the order. Daniel complied immediately, stepping back as Peterson scrambled to his feet, face flushed with humiliation. Henderson turned to Blackwood. Colonel, I believe you and your men have duties elsewhere. Report to my office at 1500 hours. Sir, this civilian just assaulted one of my men, Blackwood protested. I saw a defensive response to aggression, Henderson countered. 1500 hours, Colonel. Don't be late. Blackwood's jaw clenched, but even he knew better than to challenge a direct order from a superior officer in public. With a final glare at Daniel and Emma, he motioned to his squad. This isn't over, he muttered as they retreated. Once Blackwood and his men had left, Henderson turned back to Daniel, studying him with renewed interest. Mr. Collins, I presume. Daniel nodded once. A knowing look passed between the two men, the kind of silent communication that spoke volumes without words. Perhaps you and Mrs. Collins would like to continue this conversation in my office, Henderson suggested, though his tone made it clear this wasn't merely a suggestion. After you, Colonel, Daniel replied with the deference of someone familiar with military protocol. As they prepared to leave, a grizzled master sergeant who had been watching from a corner table stood up suddenly. The old veteran's eyes widened in recognition as he stared at Daniel. Sweet Jesus, the master sergeant breathed. It can't be. Daniel's eyes met the sergeant's, a silent message passing between them. The older man straightened reflexively, years of military discipline asserting themselves even in retirement. Good to see you, Master Sergeant Wilkins, Daniel said quietly. Still enjoying those cigars from Honduras? Wilkins swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Every Victory Day, just like you said. Daniel nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Good man. As Daniel, Emma, and Colonel Henderson left the mess hall, conversation exploded behind them. The master sergeant found himself surrounded by curious personnel, all asking variations of the same question. Who exactly was Daniel Collins? Wilkins shook his head, looking toward the door where Daniel had exited. Boys, you just saw a ghost. The kind the government claims doesn't exist. In Henderson's office, the atmosphere shifted from public confrontation to private assessment. The colonel closed the door, engaged the privacy lock, and moved to his desk where he pressed a sequence on his computer keyboard, activating a counter-surveillance protocol. The subtle hum of electronic interference filled the room, ensuring their conversation remained private. It's been a long time, Phantom, Henderson said, using a call sign rather than a name or rank. 14 years, 7 months, Daniel replied precisely, Istanbul, the embassy operation. Henderson nodded, memories of that classified mission briefly darkening his expression. Never thought I'd see you back on base, especially not like this. He gestured to Emma, and certainly not married to one of my mess hall staff. Emma touched her cheek where the redness from Blackwood's slap was beginning to fade. Life takes unexpected turns, Colonel. That it does, Mrs. Collins. Or should I say, Henderson began. Emma's fine, Colonel, she interrupted smoothly. I prefer to keep things simple. Henderson studied her with new interest. Simple? Right. He turned back to Daniel. So, I assume this isn't a coincidence? You showing up right when Blackwood's group is getting comfortable. Daniel's expression gave nothing away. I was due for a visit. Emma mentioned some concerns. Concerns? Henderson repeated, settling into his chair. That's one way to put it. He pulled a file from his desk drawer, setting it between them. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Blackwood, former Ranger, decorated, connected, and a complete bastard if you ask anyone who served under him. Daniel didn't touch the file. He didn't need to. His record, the official one, Henderson confirmed. The unofficial one would curdle milk. 3 investigations for excessive force, all mysteriously dropped. Multiple complaints from female personnel at previous postings, all buried. And since arriving at Fort Marshall, he's established what amounts to a personal fiefdom. Protected from above, Daniel observed. Henderson nodded grimly. Colonel Raymond Carter, West Point graduate, Pentagon connections, rumored to be on the short list for general. He brought Blackwood with him when he transferred here. They've been inseparable since Afghanistan in 2018. Emma leaned forward. It's more than just bullying and harassment, Colonel. There's something else happening here. Henderson raised an eyebrow. Go on. Unusual access patterns to restricted areas, midnight visits to the armory, communications outside normal channels. Emma spoke with the precise delivery of someone providing intelligence analysis. 3 weeks ago, I observed Blackwood meeting with unidentified individuals at the old maintenance shed near the east perimeter. No record of visitors in the log. Henderson's eyes narrowed. And you know this how, exactly? Emma exchanged a glance with Daniel, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Let's just say cooking isn't my only skill set, she replied. A knowing look crossed Henderson's face. I see. So this wasn't a coincidence either. You being assigned to my mess hall 8 months ago. The food service contractor was happy to place me here, Emma said with a slight shrug. I do make excellent pot roast. Daniel remained silent, watching the exchange with the patience of a man accustomed to letting situations develop at their own pace. Henderson turned to him. And you just happened to show up today when Blackwood decided to make his move on your wife? Emma called me last night, Daniel explained. Said things were escalating. I was already en route from Jordan. Jordan, Henderson repeated. Interesting place for a security consultant to be these days. Daniel didn't elaborate. Henderson sighed, leaning back in his chair. Look, I've been at Fort Marshall for 3 years. I've built something good here. A clean command. If there's something going on with Blackwood and Carter, I need to know. Not hints, not suspicions. Evidence. Emma reached into her pocket and removed a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the desk. 2 days ago, this fell from Blackwood's pocket when he was harassing one of my staff. He didn't notice. Henderson unfolded the paper, his expression darkening as he read. These are access codes, high-level ones for the Special Weapons Depot, Emma confirmed, and the timing coincides with the arrival of the new M142 HIMARS system for evaluation. Henderson's head snapped up. That's classified information. Emma met his gaze steadily. Yes, it is. The colonel looked between Daniel and Emma, reassessing everything he thought he knew about the couple. Who exactly are you people? Daniel finally spoke. People who serve their country, Colonel, just like you. Different methods, Same goals. The weapons leaving here aren't going to friendly nations or even black market buyers, Emma added. They're being channeled to specific groups with specific goals, terrorist cells, domestic and international. Henderson turned back to them, his face pale. That's a hell of an accusation, which is why we need evidence, Daniel acknowledged. Hard evidence that will stand up to scrutiny even with Carter's connections running interference. And you think you can get this evidence? Daniel's expression remained neutral. That's the plan. And where do I fit into this plan? We need your help, Colonel, Emma said. Access, information, and most importantly, your silence until we have what we need. As they left Henderson's office with the colonel's reluctant agreement to help, Daniel and Emma walked in silence toward their temporary quarters. The weight of what they were undertaking hung between them. Years of covert operations had taught them both the cost of commitment to duty. I thought we were done with all this, Daniel said quietly once they were alone in their quarters. It was a rare admission of uncertainty from a man who had built his career on decisive action. Emma studied her husband's face, seeing the conflict beneath his composed exterior. Did you? Really? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. I wanted to be. For us. Some oaths don't expire with our service, Emma replied, unconsciously echoing the words Daniel himself had spoken during past missions. But I understand the cost. We've both paid it before. Daniel nodded, the silent acknowledgement of shared sacrifice passing between them. They had found each other in the shadows of duty, a legendary operative and a brilliant analyst who understood each other's worlds completely. Their marriage was built on that understanding, on the acceptance of who they were at their core. If we do this, Daniel said, we go all the way. No half measures. Emma's eyes, warm again now that they were alone, met his with unwavering resolve. We finish what we start. Always have. With that simple exchange, their decision was made. The brief moment of personal reflection set aside as they turned their focus to the mission ahead. Night had fallen over Fort Marshall. In their small temporary housing unit, Daniel secured the door while Emma checked the windows. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of partners accustomed to working together, sweeping the room for surveillance devices without needing to discuss their methodology. Only when they were certain of their privacy did they truly relax. Emma gently touched her cheek where Blackwood had struck her, the mark now barely visible. That will complicate things, she said. It was always going to get complicated, Daniel replied, removing a secure satellite phone from a hidden compartment in his luggage. The question is whether we can still complete the mission. We can, Emma said confidently. Blackwood's ego will drive him to make mistakes now. He can't let the humiliation stand. Daniel nodded, dialing a number from memory. After a series of security protocols were exchanged, he spoke briefly. Package compromised, timeline accelerated, request support assets. He listened briefly before adding, confirmed, phantom out. As he ended the call, Emma removed her own phone and pulled up a series of photos, surveillance images of Blackwood meeting with unidentified men at various locations around Fort Marshall. Facial recognition identified two of them, she reported. Former Serbian military, known arms dealers with ties to 3 different terrorist organizations. Daniel studied the images. Henderson was right. Our appearance will force their hand. Good, Emma said firmly. I'm tired of serving pot roast to men who plan to sell weapons to terrorists. A rare smile touched Daniel's lips. You do make excellent pot roast, though. Emma returned his smile, the hardened intelligence operative momentarily giving way to the woman who had fallen in love with the legendary Phantom during a joint CIA military operation 5 years earlier. Their marriage was real, their feelings genuine, something neither had expected when they first met in a Damascus safe house during a mission gone wrong. We have 48 hours at most, Daniel calculated. They'll move the weapons before Carter's scheduled inspection on Friday. Emma nodded. I accessed the base delivery logs. 3 unmarked trucks are scheduled for Thursday night. Maintenance equipment, supposedly. Perfect cover for moving HIMARS components. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Both tensed, Daniel moving silently to a position beside the entrance, while Emma palmed a small pistol from beneath the coffee table. "Mrs. Collins?" a young voice called. "Private Jenkins, ma'am. Colonel Henderson asked me to deliver this package to you." Daniel checked through the peephole, then nodded to Emma. She concealed her weapon and opened the door. A nervous young private stood holding a manila envelope. "Colonel's compliments, ma'am. He said you requested base personnel files for kitchen staffing." "Thank you, Private," Emma said warmly, resuming her role as the friendly mess hall cook. "Please tell the Colonel I appreciate his prompt response." When the door closed, Emma opened the envelope to find not personnel files, but detailed security protocols for the weapons depot and upcoming guard rotations. Henderson was fully committed to their operation. "We have our window," Emma said, scanning the documents. "Thursday, 200 hours. Skeleton crew, no scheduled patrols in the East Sector." Daniel nodded. "I'll contact the team. We'll need at least 4 additional operators to secure the area and document the transfer." A thunderous crash shattered their planning as the front window exploded inward. Daniel tackled Emma to the floor as a flashbang grenade detonated. Even prepared, the concussive force and blinding light were disorienting. Years of training kicked in as Daniel and Emma recovered faster than civilians would, rolling away from the window and taking cover behind furniture. More glass shattered as bullets tore through the remaining windows, splintering wood and embedding in walls. This was no warning. It was an assassination attempt. Without speaking, Daniel and Emma implemented emergency protocols they had established years ago. Daniel moved to the bedroom while Emma covered him, then retrieved hidden weapons from their luggage. When he returned, he handed Emma a compact 9mm pistol with suppressor while keeping a similar weapon for himself. "Extraction route?" Emma asked tersely, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. "East side through the kitchen," Daniel replied, equally concise. "They'll expect us to use the rear exit." As if confirming his assessment, more gunfire erupted, this time concentrated on the back of the house. Daniel moved to the kitchen, staying low beneath window level. Emma followed, covering their rear. At the kitchen door, Daniel paused, listening intently before cracking it open to assess the situation. The eastern side of their quarters faced a small storage building, creating a narrow passage that connected to an alley running behind the officers' housing area. Daniel spotted a single gunman covering this route, Captain Peterson, his silhouette unmistakable in the dim evening light. Daniel signaled Peterson's position to Emma, who nodded understanding. With hand gestures, Daniel outlined a simple but effective plan. Emma acknowledged and took position by the door as Daniel moved to the living room window. With deliberate noise, Daniel knocked over a lamp, creating a distraction that drew Peterson's attention toward the front of the house. In that moment, Emma slipped through the kitchen door and moved silently along the wall of the house. Peterson never saw her coming. Emma applied a textbook chokehold, controlling his descent as he lost consciousness to ensure he made no noise. She secured his weapon and signaled to Daniel, who joined her moments later. Together, they moved through the shadows toward the storage building, avoiding the pools of light from scattered security lamps. The sound of gunfire continued behind them. Blackwood's men still firing into an empty house, unaware their targets had already escaped. The rural safe house stood silhouetted against the night sky, its weathered exterior revealing nothing of its purpose. Located 30 miles from Fort Marshall on a neglected county road, the converted farmhouse offered perfect operational security. Clear sight lines in all directions, multiple escape routes, and no neighbors within earshot. Inside, Daniel and Emma worked with practiced efficiency, transforming the main room into an operations center. Tactical maps of Fort Marshall covered one wall. Surveillance photos of Blackwood, Carter, and their associates occupied another. A secure communications array hummed softly in the corner, its satellite uplink connecting them to resources few civilians knew existed. Team ETA 20 minutes, Emma announced, setting down a secure phone. Her transformation from mess hall cook to intelligence operative was complete. Posture straightened, movements precise, voice carrying the clipped professionalism of someone accustomed to briefing field agents. Daniel nodded, studying satellite imagery of Fort Marshall's eastern perimeter. The attack on their quarters had forced acceleration, but years of operational experience had taught him to adapt rather than abandon. Henderson confirms 3 unmarked trucks entered the base 30 minutes ago, Emma continued, registered to Meridian Security Consultants. Shell Company, Daniel observed, incorporated 6 months ago. On paper, they provide private security services to government contractors. Perfect cover for moving restricted weapons. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their analysis. Daniel moved to the window, checking the arrivals through a specialized night vision monocular. Recognizing the distinctive driving pattern, a security protocol developed for covert operators, he relaxed marginally. It's them, he confirmed. Minutes later, 4 men entered the farmhouse, each carrying specialized equipment bags. They moved with the quiet confidence of professionals who had operated in the shadows for decades. To casual observers, they might appear as ordinary middle-aged men, a carpenter, an engineer, a rural doctor, a small business owner. Nothing in their civilian attire suggested their lethal capabilities or the classified operations in their past. Jack Reynolds came first, former Marine Scout sniper with 27 confirmed kills during operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. At 55, his weathered face and calloused hands suggested nothing more dangerous than his current profession as a master carpenter. Miguel Ortiz followed, once the premier explosives expert in force recon, now a structural engineer whose designs had won awards for innovation. Dr. William Doc Harris entered third, former Navy corpsman attached to Marine Special Operation Teams, now a country doctor serving rural communities. Sam Davis completed the group, ex-Marine signals intelligence specialist who had pioneered cyber warfare techniques still classified. Now running a small cybersecurity firm, the 49-year-old's unassuming appearance belied his status as one of the most sophisticated hackers ever employed by the United States government. Together with Daniel, they had once formed the core of a unit so classified that most flag officers weren't aware of its existence. Codenamed Phantoms, they had conducted operations that altered the course of conflicts without leaving evidence of American involvement. "Been a while, Phantom," Jack said simply, clasping Daniel's hand firmly. "Too long, Spectre," Daniel replied, using Jack's old call sign. "Situation?" Miguel asked, setting down his equipment bag. Daniel gestured to the operations wall. "Weapons smuggling out of Fort Marshall, high-value systems, HIMARS components, targeting systems, rocket pods." "Domestic or international?" Doc inquired, already unpacking medical supplies, preparation for contingencies that experience told him might arise. "Both," Emma answered, taking point on the intelligence briefing. "Initial evidence suggests components are being distributed to domestic extremist cells, while complete systems are heading overseas to established terror groups." Sam whistled softly. "HIMARS in terrorist hands. That's a game changer. Mobile launch platforms with precision strike capability." "Point of origin?" Jack asked, examining the surveillance photos. "Colonel Raymond Carter, Fort Marshall Command. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Blackwood executing. Unknown number of support personnel." Daniel indicated the relevant photos. "But we believe Carter is receiving orders from higher up. Codenamed Triton, Pentagon." Miguel's expression darkened. "Likely," Emma confirmed. "The operation is too sophisticated, too well-resourced for a rogue colonel." As they continued planning, Emma's secure phone vibrated. The caller ID showed Henderson's encrypted line. "Yes, Colonel," Emma answered, activating the speaker function. Henderson's voice was tense. "They've moved up the timeline. Trucks are being loaded now. Estimated departure in 60 minutes, not 3 hours." Daniel and his team exchanged glances, immediately shifting mental gears. "Understood. Additional intel?" Daniel asked. "Heavy security. Carter's deployed his personal security detail, ex-Special Forces contractors, not regular MPs. Blackwood's leading the convoy personally. Route, East Gate, then county roads to avoid interstate cameras. I've uploaded the probable route to your secure server. Composition, 3 transport trucks, 2 security vehicles front and rear, approximately 15 personnel, heavily armed." Daniel processed this information with the rapid assessment skills that had kept him alive through countless operations. "Thanks, Colonel. Maintain position, implausible deniability." "Roger that. In Collins," Henderson paused. "These people tried to kill you and Emma. Don't take unnecessary risks." "Copy," Daniel replied simply before ending the call. The team immediately accelerated preparations, condensing what should have been hours of planning into minutes. Sam accessed the uploaded route information, identifying optimal interception points. Jack studied topographical maps, selecting positions that would provide overwatch. Miguel prepared specialized devices to disable vehicles without destroying sensitive cargo. Throughout the controlled chaos of preparation, Daniel remained the calm center, assessing, deciding, directing with the quiet authority that had earned him the loyalty of these elite operators years before. "Interception point here," he determined, marking a location on the map where the convoy route passed through a densely wooded area. "Natural choke point, limited escape routes, good cover for our approach." "Traffic?" Jack asked. "Minimal at 0100, Emma confirmed, checking transportation department data. "Last vehicle reported on that stretch was 40 minutes ago." "Surveillance?" Miguel inquired. "One traffic camera at the junction, but Sam can loop the feed," Daniel replied. Sam nodded confirmation. "Already on it." "Contingencies?" Doc asked, always thinking of fallback options. "Full spectrum," Daniel said grimly. "From mechanical failure cover story to direct action if necessary." The unspoken understanding hung in the air. They would avoid bloodshed if possible, but if American lives were at stake, if these weapons were truly bound for terrorist hands, they would do whatever was necessary to complete the mission. Emma continued analyzing intelligence feeds on her tablet. Something about the operation had been bothering her, a detail that didn't align with the pattern. "The airfield in North Carolina," she said suddenly. "It doesn't make sense as a distribution point." Daniel glanced at her. "Why not?" "Too exposed. Commercial satellites pass overhead regularly. Customs and Border Protection conducts random aerial surveillance in that sector." Her mind worked through the problem with analytical precision. They wouldn't risk moving restricted weapons through a facility with that much potential oversight. "Unless that's not the actual destination," Miguel suggested from the back seat. Emma nodded slowly. "Exactly. It's a diversion." Her fingers moved rapidly across her tablet, accessing additional intelligence sources. "If I were running this operation, I'd establish multiple decoy routes while moving the actual shipment through the least obvious channel." Daniel considered this assessment. Emma's analytical instincts had proven correct too many times to ignore. "Alternative destinations?" "Working on it," Emma replied, her focus intense as she analyzed transportation patterns and security reports. After several minutes of concentrated effort, she looked up. "Private marina 40 miles east of the airfield, registered to another shell company with the same incorporation pattern as Meridian Security. Water route. International waters within 3 hours," Daniel concluded. "Transfer to a larger vessel than anywhere in the world." "This changes our interception parameters," Jack noted. If we hit the convoy, we might only get the decoy shipment. Through the night vision scope, Daniel observed the marina with methodical precision. Two sleek vessels were docked at the far end, their low profiles and matte black hulls suggesting military craft modified for civilian appearance. Floodlights illuminated the loading area where men in nondescript tactical gear moved crates from vehicles to the boats. 8 personnel visible, Daniel reported, professionally positioned, not standard security contractors. These are operators. 4 additional personnel on the boats, Miguel added. 2 snipers on the roof of the operations building. Identified 2 of them, Miguel continued. Former Delta. Worked with them in Syria in 2013. Friendly? Emma asked quietly. Professional, Miguel clarified. They go where the money is now. Daniel continued his assessment. 3 vehicles. Cargo consistent with HIMARS components based on container dimensions. Emma's analytical mind processed the tactical situation. They're rushing. Proper loading protocols aren't being followed. Something spooked them. Us, Daniel concluded. The attack on our quarters at Fort Marshall was meant to eliminate witnesses. When that failed, they accelerated the timeline. Makes them vulnerable, Miguel observed. Rushed operations lead to mistakes. Daniel formulated a plan balancing the need for intelligence collection against the imperative to prevent the weapons from leaving American waters. Objectives in order of priority. 1. Documentation of personnel and cargo for prosecution. 2. Identification of command structure and final destination. 3. Disabling the vessels if objectives 1 and 2 are achieved. For 12 tense minutes they observed and recorded. The loading operation continued with professional precision despite the evident rush. Crates were transferred from vehicles to the boats, secured in specialized compartments designed to prevent detection by standard inspection methods. Then a new vehicle arrived, a black SUV with diplomatic plates. New player, Daniel murmured into his communications link. Diplomatic vehicle approaching main entrance. All team members focused attention on this development. Diplomatic registration added a complicated dimension to an already complex situation. The SUV stopped near the operations building. The driver emerged first, scanning the area with the practiced eye of a security professional before opening the rear door. A tall figure stepped out, male, approximately 60 years old, carrying himself with the unmistakable bearing of senior military leadership. Though dressed in civilian clothes, everything about him suggested flag officer. Visual confirmation, Emma reported through the comm. Facial recognition match, Vice Admiral James Harrington, Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence. The implication was immediately clear to everyone on the team. This wasn't just a rogue operation by a corrupt colonel. With naval intelligence involvement at the deputy director level, the conspiracy reached into the highest echelons of military leadership. Triton, Daniel concluded grimly. They watched as Harrington, codenamed Triton, inspected the loading operation, conferring with the security team leader and examining documentation. His presence confirmed their worst fears. The weapon smuggling operation had protection from within the intelligence community itself. This changes everything, Emma observed. Harrington has access to counter-surveillance resources, operational oversight of naval deployments, intelligence on our movements, and credibility, if questioned, Miguel added, his word against ours. Daniel remained focused on documentation, using specialized equipment to capture high-resolution images of Harrington's interaction with the team and inspection of the weapons components. This evidence would be crucial for any future prosecution, assuming they survived to present it. For a moment, Daniel felt a wave of something unfamiliar, betrayal, deep and personal. In his decades of service, he had operated on the assumption that while methods might be questionable, the chain of command ultimately served the nation's interests. Seeing Harrington there shattered that foundational belief. He was looking at the face of a man who had likely approved operations Daniel had carried out, who had access to every classified mission in his file, now engaged in treason against the country they had both sworn to protect. Daniel, Emma's voice in his earpiece pulled him back to the present. Few others would have detected the momentary shift in his focus, but Emma knew him better than anyone. "I'm good," he replied simply, his practiced composure returning. But the moment had changed something fundamental. This was no longer just another mission. It was personal in a way few operations had ever been. 16 minutes into their observation, a sudden change in the loading operations tempo caught Daniel's attention. The security team's movements became more urgent, their scanning of the perimeter more frequent. "They're suspicious," Miguel noted. "Something's triggered their security protocols." Daniel observed the pattern, recognizing the indicators from his own operational experience. "Agreed. Either they've detected something or been warned." As if confirming his assessment, the security team leader spoke urgently to Harrington, who immediately returned to his vehicle. Two operators took up defensive positions, scanning the tree line with thermal imaging devices. "We've been compromised," Daniel concluded. "Exfil Plan Alpha. Rendezvous at fallback position in 30 minutes." The team acknowledged and began carefully withdrawing from their positions. Years of training and clandestine operations guided their movements. Methodical, patient, prioritizing stealth over speed. Daniel and Miguel had almost reached the tree line when a shout from the marina perimeter shattered the night. "Contact west fence. Two targets moving into the woods." Floodlights swiveled toward their position, and the distinctive sound of weapons being readied echoed across the marina. "Go," Daniel ordered Miguel. "Different routes. I'll create a diversion." Miguel hesitated only briefly before acknowledging the order. As the team's leader, Daniel had made similar decisions countless times, placing mission success above personal safety, ensuring his operators could complete their objectives. Daniel removed a small device from his equipment vest, a specialized distraction unit developed for special operations. Activating it, he threw it 30 meters to his right before moving rapidly in the opposite direction. The device performed as designed, creating multiple heat signatures and sound patterns that mimicked human movement. The security team focused their attention on the false signatures, buying precious time for the actual operators to withdraw. Emma, observing from her elevated position, maintained communication discipline while documenting the security team's response. Her hands remained steady on her equipment despite the danger to Daniel, her professional training overriding personal concern. At the predetermined rally point, the team reassembled quickly, accounting for all members and equipment. "Documentation secured," Emma confirmed. "High-resolution images of Harrington, the weapons components, security personnel, and loading operation. Satellite imagery of the entire process with timestamp verification. Communications intercept data downloaded," Sam added. "Partial decryption of operational parameters, including destination and timeline. Identification of 8 security personnel through facial recognition," Miguel reported. 4 confirmed former U.S. Special Operations, 2 former Russian Spetsnaz, 2 unknown. Daniel nodded approval. Despite the compromise and hasty extraction, they had achieved their primary objective, gathering actionable intelligence on the weapons smuggling operation and its participants. "We've achieved the intelligence objective," Daniel said. "Now we need to prevent those weapons from reaching their destination." "How?" Doc asked the question on everyone's mind. "We're 5 operators against a protected naval intelligence operation with unknown resources." Daniel turned to Sam. "Options through official channels?" Sam shook his head. "Compromised. Harrington's position gives him visibility into any official inquiry. He'd know immediately, have time to cover tracks or accelerate the timeline." "What about Henderson?" Miguel suggested. "Valuable ally but limited reach," Daniel assessed. "Base security commander can't override naval intelligence operations or access required resources." A thoughtful silence fell over the room as each team member contemplated the seemingly impossible situation. They had the intelligence, the evidence of treason at the highest levels, but no clear path to act on it without endangering the mission and themselves. Emma, her analytical mind continuing to work through the problem, looked up suddenly. There's someone else, someone Harrington can't control or monitor. All eyes turned to her. Director Catherine Hayes, Department of Justice, National Security Division, career prosecutor, no military connections, presidential appointment with Senate confirmation. Her office handles espionage and terrorism cases independent of military chains of command. Daniel considered this suggestion. Verification of independence? I worked with her on 3 separate operations during my CIA tenure, Emma confirmed. Absolute integrity, completely independent of military influence. And she has the authority to mobilize FBI hostage rescue team assets if necessary. The team exchanged glances weighing this option. The Department of Justice National Security Division represented a potential solution, an agency with both the authority and resources to act on their intelligence without being compromised by Harrington's influence. Contact protocol, Daniel asked. Secure established during previous operations, Emma replied. Communication pathway Harrington wouldn't monitor or expect. Daniel made the decision. Make contact, present evidence, situation assessment, and timeline. Request immediate intervention to intercept the weapon shipment. As Emma established the secure connection to Director Hayes, the rest of the team continued processing their intelligence, organizing evidence, and preparing contingency plans. Years of operational experience had taught them to hope for the best while preparing for the worst. Emma's conversation with Hayes lasted 23 minutes, concise, detailed, professional. When she ended the call, her expression conveyed cautious optimism. Hayes is activating a specialized FBI maritime interdiction team, she reported. They'll approach by water to avoid detection. ETA 90 minutes. Daniel processed this information. Too long if they accelerate their departure. Agreed. We need to delay them, Emma confirmed. Hayes suggests electronic disruption if possible. Minimal direct engagement. Daniel nodded, turning to Sam. Options? Sam outlined a plan for electronic warfare against the marina systems, navigation disruption, communications interference, anything to slow the departure without revealing their presence. I'll need to get closer, Sam concluded, within 50 meters for reliable effect. High risk, Jack observed. Necessary risk, Daniel countered. Sam and I will approach from the east. Electronic warfare package deployment is primary objective. The rest of you maintain observation positions and documentation. The plan set, they moved back into position. Daniel and Sam approached the marina perimeter with practiced stealth, reaching an optimal position for electronic disruption. Sam deployed his specialized equipment, establishing the interface necessary to access the vessel's systems. Navigation systems compromise, Sam reported moments later, introducing corrupted waypoint data and GPS signal interference. On the docks, the first signs of their intervention became visible. A crew member on the lead boat gestured urgently to the pilot, pointing at malfunctioning navigation displays. The scheduled departure paused as they attempted to diagnose the unexpected technical issues. Effect confirmed, Emma reported from her observation position. Departure delayed, security posture unchanged. They believe it's a technical malfunction, not external interference. For 3 minutes, their operation progressed according to plan. Then circumstances changed as they inevitably did in field operations. A security team member with specialized training began inspecting the electronic systems more thoroughly. His body language shifted from confusion to suspicion. They're on to us, Emma warned. Security posture changing. They're preparing for emergency departure regardless of technical issues. Sam, status on engine disruption? Daniel asked urgently. Partial access only, Sam replied. Can reduce efficiency but not prevent launch. Need better position for full effectiveness. Daniel faced a critical decision point. Pushing closer to the marina would significantly increase their risk of detection and confrontation. Staying in position might allow the weapons to escape. Maintain current position, Daniel ordered, prioritizing team security. Deploy available engine disruption. Sam acknowledged and implemented the limited measures available from his current position. On the docks, the effects manifested as one boat's engines sputtered before emergency systems restored partial functionality. It was enough to create confusion and delay, but not enough to prevent departure entirely. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. FBI update, Daniel requested. ETA 75 minutes, Emma replied. Still too long. Just as it seemed the boats would depart despite their interference, a new development changed everything. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approached from the southwest. Powerful searchlights swept the marina as three military helicopters appeared overhead, their markings indicating they belonged to Naval Criminal Investigative Service. This isn't Hayes, Emma observed, confusion evident in her voice. Henderson, Daniel realized. The base security commander had acted independently, reaching out through his own channels to bring in assets beyond Blackwood and Carter's influence. The NCIS helicopters established a hover pattern over the marina, their loudspeakers ordering everyone to stand down and remain in position. Armed agents fast roped to the ground, quickly securing the perimeter and approaching the vessels with weapons ready. Daniel and his team watched from concealed positions as the operation they had initiated reached its climax without their direct involvement. The NCIS team moved with professional precision, detaining the security personnel and securing the weapons components. Admiral Harrington was nowhere to be seen. He had escaped during the initial confusion. But Colonel Carter and Lieutenant Colonel Blackwood were visible among those being handcuffed and led to waiting vehicles. Stand down, Daniel ordered his team. Maintain observation positions only. Documentation continues until full resolution. They remained in place, recording everything as the FBI maritime team arrived 40 minutes later, coordinating with NCIS to complete the operation. Only when the weapons had been fully secured and all personnel detained did Daniel finally signal their withdrawal. Mission accomplished, he said simply. Exfiltration by separate routes. Rendezvous at Safe House in 2 hours. The operation's aftermath unfolded over days and weeks. Emma maintained contact with Director Hayes, ensuring their evidence reached the appropriate authorities without being compromised. The weapons smuggling ring was dismantled piece by piece, with arrests spanning military bases across 3 states. Daniel and his team dispersed back to their civilian lives, returning to the careful anonymity they had cultivated since leaving active service. For 2 months, Emma and Daniel lived in a temporary apartment in D.C., assisting with the investigation when needed, providing testimony through secure channels. The evidence they had gathered proved decisive. High-resolution images of Harrington overseeing the weapons transfer, communications intercepts revealing the broader conspiracy, and the physical weapons themselves created an airtight case that even the Admiral's considerable influence couldn't overcome. When the closed military tribunal finally concluded, Emma and Daniel watched the news in their new home, a small restaurant with living quarters above it in rural Virginia. The public announcement was deliberately vague. Senior military officials convicted of security violations. But they knew the full truth. Harrington had received life imprisonment. Carter and Blackwood had been sentenced to 20 and 15 years, respectively. The weapons had been recovered, the terrorist cells identified, and neutralized. Was it worth it? Daniel asked quietly one evening, months after they had returned to civilian life. They stood in their restaurant kitchen after closing, the familiar smells of Emma's cooking still lingering in the air. Emma looked at him, understanding the depth of his question. Their intervention had exposed treason at the highest levels, prevented American weapons from reaching terrorist hands, and likely saved countless lives. But it had also shattered their carefully constructed civilian identity, forced them back into the shadows they had tried to leave behind, and reminded them both of the life they had chosen to set aside. Yes, she said simply, because we remembered who we are. Daniel nodded, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. They had built this restaurant together, creating a space of warmth and normalcy after years in the cold world of covert operations. Yet when duty called, they had answered without hesitation. Do you ever regret it? He asked. This life we've chosen? Emma considered the question, her analytical mind weighing their past against their present. I regret that the world needs people like us, she said finally, but I don't regret being one of them. The bell above the door chimed, despite the closed sign hanging in the window. Daniel turned, his posture shifting subtly as he registered the familiar figure entering their restaurant. Colonel, now Brigadier General, Henderson stood in the doorway, his expression conveying the purpose of his visit before he spoke a word. Evening, Phantom. Henderson greeted Daniel with the old call sign and a respectful nod. Mrs. Collins. General, Daniel acknowledged, his stance shifting subtly, the civilian facade receding slightly as he recognized the visit's likely purpose. Congratulations on the promotion. Thank you. Well deserved, but unfortunately not a social call. Henderson's expression conveyed the seriousness of his purpose. We have a situation, similar pattern to last year, but broader implications. Intelligence community is compromised at senior levels. Official channels insufficient for proper investigation. Daniel and Emma exchanged glances, the wordless communication of partners who understood each other completely. The team? Daniel asked simply. Ready when you are, Henderson confirmed. Transport standing by. Emma returned to the kitchen long enough to retrieve a small go bag always kept prepared, old habits maintained despite their civilian life. Daniel did the same. The practiced efficiency of operators accustomed to immediate deployment, never entirely forgotten. As they approached Henderson's vehicle, Emma paused to look back at their restaurant, the ordinary life they had built together after extraordinary careers. We'll be back, Daniel assured her, reading her thoughts as he often did. I know, Emma replied with quiet confidence. Some things are worth protecting. They entered the vehicle, and Henderson provided initial briefing materials as they departed. Another mission, another threat to the nation they had served faithfully throughout their lives. For Daniel and Emma Collins, the cycle continued, periods of ordinary life punctuated by extraordinary service when called upon. Not for recognition or reward, but from the fundamental commitment that had defined their careers from the beginning. To stand between their nation and those who would harm it, regardless of personal cost. Behind them, their small restaurant and modest home stood as testimony to the life they had built, a life made possible by the sacrifices of countless quiet professionals who served their country from the shadows, asking nothing in return but the opportunity to live in the peace they helped secure for others. The black SUV carrying Daniel and Emma Collins disappeared into the Virginia twilight, but the impact of their story would echo far beyond the quiet country roads they traveled. In the world of shadows and duty, legends never truly retire. They simply wait for the next call to service.